Yeah. So this is what the curriculum looks like. So the first week is what we have here currently. I want us to have a little bit of introduction to the backend development and to know how we are going to run this program together. Okay, so that's what the purpose of this call is all about. And then at the very end, we are going to have a little bit of a review of JavaScript. Okay, so it's going to serve as a little bit of an assignment towards the upcoming weeks. It's very important that we have a good grasp of JavaScript programming language. So let's see what we have for here. Okay. So the first thing to that we need to be very familiar with is hold on. All right. So about the program. So depending on your background, we our main concern is to have is all about programming, right? So one of the few things we learn in is that programming is all about solving problems with code, right? So we want to take problems that exist in real life, and we want to find a way to solve the problem, and that's very very important to bear in mind when you are doing backend development. But in general, before we go deep into what backend is all about, we know that for sure, if you are writing software, if you are writing programming code to develop a software application or any application you want, it comes in different sections. So different stages. We have the front end development and the back end development. So the front end development deals with building interfaces that people can people can interact with. And then when we talk about the back end development, we're talking about the logic behind your applications that you are talking about. So we also have data science and DevOps, which are other terminologies which are other processes in this tech industry that we have. You can also make your research if you are interested in them. Okay, so before we get started, I would like to even mention some tools that will catch you up to everything you need to know or that we make use of at the end of this program as well. So the first thing is your YouTube, very important. So there are so many videos out there on YouTube that we can take advantage of. So we also have the different books. I'll be recommending a few that we'll be making reference of as well. Another very important one, another helpful tool to me is the Free Code Camp, and then also very important GitHub, very important. So maybe I need to share a couple of things about making use of GitHub. So at the beginning stage as a backend engineer, right, as a backend developer, you may be having some ideas about how you want to implement a certain functionality. So where GitHub really shines is that there are some existing repositories out there where other people have implemented your code or some the ideas that you may have, or you just want to see how it can all come in together in a let's say like at least in an intermediate to advanced place, so that it can serve as a way for you to learn how it all comes together. So GitHub it really shines because you get to see other repositories out there. You can search by using the search, you can get to see how you can see other code and you can try to understand how they implemented some certain things. I really feel like that's a good way to upskill yourself in personal development beyond the early tutorials that you may watch. Okay. So before we also go on, I'll also ask share how you can ask questions if you're having issues in your work. So you can send me an email. I'll drop my email at the end of the call. And then when you want to send the email, in your body of the email, you just introduce yourself and you explain what's the intent, why you are sending me a particular mail. So if it is all about a bug, you can bring it up to you can also bring it as part of the email. You can bring it up in the group chat that you are a part of. You can always just feel free to send me an email. Is more food. Hello, are you guys still with me? All right. So yeah, so that's basically just a little bit of an introduction. Okay. So so far I talked about the program. I mentioned some tools and I made one or two comments about communication. So the first thing you need to understand as a backend engineer is that you need to really understand and also appreciate how the internet works. Okay, so that's where the first thing you need to understand. So taking from the perspective of a user, the way they interact with the internet is they launch up an application on their a software application on their computer or their mobile device. So that software application is what is we all generally know as a browser. So that browser, you take the perspective of the browser as the client, right? So you hear me mention this word very often. So we talk about the client. So when they're on the browser, they hit up a certain a URL, a particular website that they want to visit. So the browser does some DNS lookup, which is a way of like taking the string from like www.microsoft.com into the location of the actual server, which we'll talk about soon enough. That the website is located at the computer, the other computer where the particular website or what particular service you are trying to access is located at. So that's what we call a DNS lookup. We are going to talk about it soon enough as well. So the process at which all of those particular like communication tools is going through is guided through the HTTP protocol. Okay. So, but the important takeaway from there is that you have a browser, you hit a website, and then it's a certain computer far away from you, and that other computer is called the server. And while your own browser is known as the client. Okay, so browsing or surfing the internet is basically a relationship between the client and the server. Okay, so another two things that you also need to be very familiar with is these two terminologies, which is called requests and responses. So one thing about whatever you do, whatever you action you perform on the web page, your client is sending a request to the server. Okay, so when the server has done some processing of your request, it will send back a response. So request is what your browser is taking to the server, and response is basically what comes back. In the middle of these operations, we have what is called a database. So a database is basically a store of information. When we need information to persist, to stay for a while, in that particular service, we make use of databases. So databases are not the only storage mechanism we have in the world of backend development, but it's a very easy one we can always quickly understand. For example, when you open up your any application, it remembers your when you log in into the service. It takes your name, your password, and it sends it to the database, right? So, and the database returns the necessary information that it should, and that's because the database is a store of data. All right. So moving on from there, to really understand how backend goes, you need to understand some simple fundamentals of some fundamental things that you need to understand. So the first one is data processing. So backend is all about processing data, right? You want to take some things from the browser, from the clients, and you want to process it and give them back something else. You want to take requests, process it, and send back a response. So that's what the backend development or the backend process is all about. And so in order for you to achieve all of that, your main concern is all about the server. Okay. So as a backend developer, you really need to think much about the server. The server is where your major development process or your major concern is. Just like on the front end, you really care about the client as well, how the UI is being rendered, and how different the colors and the font and other things that happens that a user directly sees is the business or the main priority of a front end developer. So in the back end, you are going to be implementing the business logic. Okay. So say for example, you have an application, you want to build an application to give users live updates of a football match. So the business logic, the logic of the business, say you want to charge a certain amount of money for providing these live updates. So all of that will be constructed and done through your backend code. You write your business logic in the backend code, and you find a way, and in the front end, you'll find a way for the users, the people who interact with the service, how everything is going to be neatly presented. That's the function of the front end. But at the back end, you really care about how the functionalities of everything is going to come about, how users can log in, how they log out, how they can ask to forget their password or to reset their password if needed, how the business logic of the entire thing of the entire service actually works. That's what you deal with in backend. So you have some questions you want to, there are some key priorities that you want to think about. You want to think about the reliability. So how reliable is the platform you're building? So reliability means that the service is going to be available at any point in the future. Okay, at any point in time. So of course we rely on services at any time of the day. We require a 247 um availability of your service. Okay, so when you're building your service, your backend service application, how reliable is the service you are building? That's what you really want to think about first of all. In the case of, say, some errors can happen, how often is your application crashing, and how can you mitigate on that? Okay, so the next thing you want to think about is performance. You really don't want a service that, just because a number of people are using it at the same time, then you have the entire thing running slowly. You need to think very well about the performance of the service as well. The next thing is about scalability as well. So, okay, now that this service is handling a number of people, can I think about a significantly more or higher number of people at the same time running the service at the same time? So you really want to care about the scalability of whatever you're building as well. Another very important aspect is the security of the system as well, of the service. So of course, since you are implementing business logic, And of course, you really don't want some certain information to be leaked out to the public, and you don't want your user passwords or how you are storing them. You don't want such information to be leaked out to the public. So in the back end, you really need to think about the security of the business and of the users as well. So, like I said, those key fundamental aspects have to be at the forefront of your thinking as a backend engineer. You really need to think about reliability, performance, scalability, and security as well. So these are concepts that they really flow into any backend development process, whether you're using Node.js or any other language or any other framework that you are making use of. Okay, so that's why I really started with getting some things clear with you. So in the spirit of that, let's move on to trying to understand the general backend development process. So the purpose of this particular call is not to begin by introducing the Node.js framework to you. It's just by enlightening you to the general process. It doesn't have to deal with the particular language. This is the process that everybody, regardless of of their language, will make use of. Okay. So the first thing is to understand the problem. Okay. So when you are working on the back end, you need to understand the problem that the business is trying to solve. Okay. This is like, let's say we have a football platform. Okay. So the service is new. It wants to serve as a wager platform. Okay. We have our what's it called, our competitors, right? Different services out there, they want to uh, allow people to place wagers or bets on a particular event, but they want to take it in a different way. They want to make it, say, maybe like a peer-to-peer platform. So as a backend engineer, you need to first of all understand the problem that the business is trying to solve. So this will require meeting with several people. You need to maybe like have meeting with the different stakeholders that are there. So understanding the problem is very, very key. That's number one. So when you understand the problem, you'll be able to identify the requirements. Oh, in this particular service, you are going to make use of this is the requirement. This is a service that requires a lot of computation. So you are going to use tools that are optimized for that. This is a service that requires not so much computation. They only just want to do just a little bit of a sending request to and fro, and that's just all they need. So basically, when you understand the problem, you'll be able to identify the requirement, and those requirements will guide you to using the tools that are available. So, for example, when we think of databases in general, we have two different kinds of databases. We have the relational databases and we have the non-relational databases. So, when I say relational, it means that we have tables. So, keys and tables is what we have there. And then when we say non-relational, we talk about documents. So, those are things that we are going to talk about later on. So, don't let me spend too much time on them. But basically, the two different kinds of databases have situation that they are optimized for. Okay, so when you understand the requirements of the system you want to build, that's when you'll be able to pick out the tools that you want to use. Okay, is this really a platform that you are going to be calling a third party API? So if you are going to do so, you are going to optimize your workflow for that. Or is this really a service that you are going to be relying on something called a web hook? So when we say a web hook, maybe let me type the term there. So a web hook. So a web hook is one of those things that we are going to make mention of over as the term goes. So the idea is that a webhook is like is a tool that allows a third party service to feed your application information when that application is ready. So instead of the case of an API, when you are always calling a third party application for when you need it, this information will be given to you when it is ready. So understanding what you are trying to build and the requirements for it will guide you into how you think about the service you are building. So when you know your tools, you can now design the architecture of the backend system. Okay, so the architecture is quite important, how you want different things to flow. Okay, and that's what we will be talking about as the class, as this program goes on. Another thing you will go at in general is that you define your API endpoint. So when we say API is application programming interface. Okay, so think of it as okay. A popular example that is usually used is, say, you are in a restaurant and then you have a waiter that will go get your food. You basically, like, they serve as an interface between you eating your meal and how your meal is being cooked. Your users don't really care about how the food is being cooked, but hopefully it tastes well and is in sanitary conditions anyway. But what they care about is how they get to eat. And what do? They send a waiter to go and as a middleman per se. So the same thing applies in the backend world. So your API are your middleman. They go through to your particular logic that you've implemented, and usually they are called through the front end clients or anyone who wants to consume your database, your APIs basically. So when I say consume your APIs, that means you want to make use of it in, say, maybe in any form that you've defined it to be. So sometimes you are making use of a third party API. Like, for example, if you want to implement payments in Nigeria, for example, you are likely going to use either you have different options available to you. You could use the Paystack API, you could use the Flutterwave API, and so different ones that are available. So basically, you are making use of the API in your own product, in your own development environment. Okay, so we have the API endpoint. The endpoint is how you can get to that particular functionality going on. Okay, so another thing that is generally always done is defining the database models. So the database models is, think of it as, okay, my database needs to have this particular information. For example, if you need to talk about a user on your platform, things that you may need are, say, your first name, your last name, your email address, your gender, your age, your password. So some information may not even be needed in some application, and some of them you may want them for your own flow. Say you don't want users less than 18 years to use some certain functionality. So you may want to collect their age information. So all of those things will be in the database model. So your model is how each particular thing is being structured in your database. So the information you want to collect, whether you want to make that information to be mandatory to be provided, or you just want it to be, oh, okay, it's fine if it is not there. That is where you are going to define it there. And then the other thing says the overall flow of data. Oh, if someone does this, what happens? Okay, what is going to happen when someone will do this or that? That's the flow of data. Your data is moving from here, from one point to the other in your application. Is a general thing all backend engineers would think about, regardless of what platform they are making use of. Okay, so like I said earlier on, you are going to implement the business logic as well. The problem you want to solve in particular, you have to implement it in your backend code. Another thing is you are testing the APIs. So the API, the interfaces you have written between your actual implementation and whoever wants to consume it, your APIs, how is it, how are you going to be sure that this works in certain ways? You are going to test it, and there are tools for that. You can actually, we have something called Postman. It's a very popular API testing service. We're going to teach you how to make use of that as well. Okay, and different services like that. We also have Thunderbolt and the like. I personally make use of Postman, so that's where I'm going to show you things. Okay, so another thing that is very important is login. Okay, so you should always remember that on the back end, different events are going on, different things are happening. And then when you hit some error, when some things happen in the back end, you kind of want a place to know that, oh, this is what happened at this particular time. And how do you have that? By implementing a logging system. Okay. So for example, I'm sure you've made use of a bank application before. Okay. So the anytime you every time you send you make a transfer or you make a withdrawal, those that information is usually kept in a log somewhere. Say for example, you make a transfer and you were debited, but the account you were trying to transfer the money to didn't get credited. So of course you want to complain to the customer service. So that information is usually sent back to the backend side, and the backend side will make use of the logs to check out what could have happened for that transaction before it can be resolved. Okay, so that's what one thing that is very important in backend development, regardless of the framework. Another thing is documentation. Wow, this is very very important. Okay, so you are trying to implement some logic. Okay, you want basically a backend code or a backend application is not going to sit in isolation. People are going to make use of that code as well, whether it is a front end engineer or it may be another backend engineer, right? Or a backend developer that will make use of that backend application you've written. So there will have to be a way they understand what to do. The specification of your application, you have to have a way to document it that, oh, when you send this particular request, when you are sending this maybe like a get request to this particular endpoint, okay, when you perform a certain action, this is the information that the platform is requiring. Okay, this is the information that that particular endpoint is requiring, and this is how it is going to respond back. Let me see if I have some ready examples I can show on that. Let me see. I was checking something earlier on, and let me just see if let's see if we have something that works. Okay, so this is an example of what we call a documentation, basically. So it basically just show you how you have some certain things. You want people to make use of, oh, if you make this particular call to this API, these are the kind of responses you will get, and these are the kind of information that the endpoint requires. So they've done their own part by implementing the code, and also by writing the documentation. You can see some recommendation on how to call the endpoint and when the endpoint also updates. So these are things that are kind of general from one application to the next. Okay, let me see. How do I move this around? Okay, all right. So let's go on. So the last thing I talked about was the documentation process. Okay. So, and also you have to plan for scalability, reliability, performance, like I mentioned the other time. So, as well as any other um, development process in software, there's going to be a process of debugging. Of course, we are human beings. We are always going to make mistakes. There are always things that we think will work in a certain way, and when the code is being run, you see it doesn't work the way you think it would. So we have to go catch the errors, and we are going to debug, and we have to write tests as well. So writing tests, we have unit test and integration tests. We are basically going to show that as well. And also we can do some of them using the testing platform I mentioned around here. So finally, you deploy your backend service, and maintenance is also part of the things you think about. You deploy and then you maintain the application. Okay. So those are the general processes that follow every backend development process. Okay, you think about the problem, you identify what the problem needs, and you decide on the tools that you want. Because there are always tools to and different ideas and different implementations to what you want to achieve. So you have to know how to weigh your pros and cons so that you pick something that is well optimized for your particular tool. Okay, then you decide on the architecture of what you are going to build. You define what the endpoints are going to be, and then your database information, your models, what you want your database to be collecting, and even what type of database exactly do you want, and how your data flow from one action to the next, or from one thing to the next. These are all the things that a backend engineer must concern themselves with. And then implementing the business logic, testing the APIs, logging, documentation, and thinking about reliability, scalability, performance, and and basically, and in fact, ease of ensuring that your code can easily be maintained by someone else. I think we can call that maintainability. So basically, you want your code to be easily maintained by someone else. Of course, you are not going to be the only one who will work on the platform. Okay, so you want your code to be able to someone else will come into your code and understand how you structured everything. Okay, so that's why there's an idiomatic way of setting up a backend project, and we're going to go through that together so that we understand the idea that each structure is supposed to communicate. Okay, and one other thing I didn't mention here is that is very important is also security. You need to think about the security of your users, the security of your business logic as well, because these are the things that hold together a platform, a service, the business model. We implement them and through the back end side. Okay, so without taking too much time, I wanted us to see at least to have an idea of what your APIs are. So your API is short form for application programming interface. Okay, so the idea here is that you need an interface to interact with an application. Okay, you don't really care so much about the implementation. Okay, the interface is encapsulating, is hiding away the what's it called, the implementation of what is going on. You just want to have an easy way to interact with it. In the world of backend, you talk about them using APIs, using what we call you have two things that are important anyway. You need an action, usually represented using a verb, an HTTP verb, which is more of things that we are going to discuss properly in the following week. But if you come through to the curriculum I presented here, I wrote something about your HTTP methods. Okay, there are different things that we do with on the backend side. Okay, we have the get, the post, and other ones as well. So let me just talk about these two, the get and the post. Say, for example, you want to fetch something from an application, you want to get something from an application, you are going to be making use of this your get method. Okay, so you're going to have it to get something, right? That's the action you want to perform. So you think of the get, and then you think of where exactly do you want that action to be performed, and that's the end point. Okay, so your end point and your action is what makes up an interface. Okay, so where do you have such thing coming together in? You have what is called like a an API, an API testing tool like Postman I mentioned earlier. Okay, so another one is the post request. So say you want to actually give the server an information to process. Okay, so that is what we have as you that's when you make use of the post request. Of course, we'll be talking about them very well in our next class as well. Okay, okay. So and then the next thing is we think about things in terms of requests and responses as well. Say for example, okay, I think I mentioned those earlier on. So you want to send a request. That means whenever you are reacting interacting with a backend service, you are basically sending a request, and then the service will respond back with responses basically. Okay, so just as we have different kind of requests, maybe like it's a get request, it's a post request, we also have different kinds of responses. For example, we may have a successful response telling you that, oh, this particular action or this particular request was performed successfully. We also have error responses as well, and we have different kind of error responses as well. Okay, so we have two terminologies I skipped earlier here. We have what you call the REST and GraphQL. So the two of them are different philosophies or different ways they think about the API of these APIs, basically. So far, I have been mentioning in terms of the REST philosophy, right? So REST stands for representational state transfer. So basically, it's a set of specification that or rules or guidelines that a backend engineer will try to follow. Okay, we're going to be talking about them fully as we talk about the class next week. Basically, it's the philosophy that guides what goes on in a backend service. Okay, so that's what we have as REST. So that is why sometimes you'll see the term RESTful API. Okay, RESTful API. You may see that term thrown around a lot. So it means that, yeah, that means a backend service that follows the specifications of REST. And again, REST stands for representational state transfer. Representational state transfer. Okay, so that's what that is. So on the other hand, we also have GraphQL. So GraphQL doesn't seem to be as popular as REST, but it's also another philosophy that guides this backend development process. It's there are quite some differences between REST and GraphQL, which we'll also talk about later on. So, but in general, your APIs are basically your interfaces that you want to interact with when you are having a backend application. It's basically a gateway or a tool to hide the implementation of your code, of your thinking, of the business logic, and how people can make use of it. So, in a front end world, when a front end developer writes their code, they can see how it is neatly expressed in the browser. So in the backend code, when you've written your functions and what they do, you present them in a form of APIs. So the APIs will be like, oh, this is this action and this is this endpoint. When you send this action, maybe like get or post to this endpoint, to go and do some certain thing and to give you back some certain response, right? So sending that action and to a particular endpoint is what we call a request. So if we tell it to get home or get your URL and then let's say register, for example. So that is a request. So or post to the register endpoint. That is a request. When you send a post request to the register endpoint, that is a request. But whatever your server does, that you don't get to see that. Okay, you don't get to see what is going on at the server. All you just need to know is that you get a response back. Okay, so that interface between what you are sending and what you are getting back is what we call the APIs. And that's very important in when you talk about your third party APIs as well. So it's not every time that your service is going to be used on directly on the front end. So other backend may also make use of your APIs as well, other backend developers. So in that case, you are making use of their API directly in your own application. So when we talk about the third-party APIs, I really don't need to know how Paystack is doing the processing of a payment. I don't really need to know about that. All I need to know is that I'm sending a request following the documentation that they've provided, and they will give me back a response and a different kind of responses that they have. Okay, so that's the idea about your APIs. You are sending a request and you are getting back a response. How the two of them are coming together is what is maintained by what is called an API. Okay, so I think I've come to the end of talking about the general ideas that a backend engineer needs to concern themselves with. I've talked about browsers, talked about servers. So your browser is basically a computer sitting somewhere, and your server is another computer sitting elsewhere. So you send your internet is basically how you are pinging a faraway computer, and it's giving your own computer information that is required. Okay. So, and in the middle of that, you have some different things going on. Some interaction between your own internet service provider to the browser itself, to doing a DNS lookup, to eating some databases through some certain protocol. Okay, so that's basically how the internet works. Really understanding how the internet works, you can, as a backend engineer, you just need to have an idea of how the entire thing works. I've been talking about IDIN implementation. So far, you don't really need to know how a DNS lookup is being performed. You don't really need to know how the HTTP protocol is being handled, is being done, implemented. You don't really need to know how this. You even need to know about how the server is being, where it is, or how it acts, or whatever about it. All you just need to know is that some information is going to be eaten away from you. You are going to know how you can interact with it. That's what backend is basically all about. Okay. And then in order for you to really excel well, there are some fundamentals you really need to really grab: security, scalability, performance, reliability, and implementing the business logic in a good, very scalable, performant, reliable manner is and secure manner is what backend development is all about. Okay, and in order for you to do so, you just need to follow some certain processes, regardless of whatever tools that you're making use of. You're understanding the problem, highlighting the requirement it has, deciding on what tools you want to have, regardless of whether you are writing your backend in Python, in Go, in Java, or in Node.js like we are. You are going to be making use of these processes. You're going to be interacting with a database. You're going to have a client. You're going to have an API. You're going to have a server. So it's important to think about everything first of all without going into the particular language or whatever framework that we are going to be making use of. So understanding these fundamental processes is very important. Logging and documentation is very, very, very important as well. I really don't need to overemphasize or emphasize too much on it. It's very, very important. Okay. So those may be the things that even serve as differences between the pure front end work and a back end work. Okay, so you really need to log events that happen in your back end, and you really need to document how your APIs should be made use of. Okay, and you really need to care about the fact that it's not just the your code is not just the front end that will be consuming it anyway, your back end as well. Okay, so I used to make some mistake in thinking about so much about how the front end is going to make use of the API, but not really giving enough emphasis into the fact that some third party my work could actually be something consumed by a third party API, third party backend engineer basically. So you need to think about things about that as well. So I also explain what APIs are all about, your requests and responses, your action, and your endpoints as well. Okay. So I think once we have a good background of all of that, then it's time to start coming into what our program is really all about specifically. And in order for us to get through with that, we really need to review the language we are going to be using. Okay, we're going to be reviewing JavaScript. Okay, we're going to be making use of JavaScript. As we know, the Node.js is a JavaScript runtime. That's what allows JavaScript to be a server-side language. Okay, so we know, of course, if you are familiar with the front end side of things, we know that JavaScript is really how things are rendered nicely on the browser. Okay, so we know that JavaScript is very, very important when it comes to the front end development world. But on the back end, there are several because it's just all about how different computers work. We really specifically don't need JavaScript to work on the back end. You can make use of an entirely different language, but relying on the specifications that or the processes that I mentioned earlier. But on the back end side of things, JavaScript is also kind of important, and that's what came about from Node.js. Okay, so Node.js is really what allowed such things to be possible. It's a JavaScript runtime and allows for server-side JavaScript programs, essentially. So in order for you to excel well in all of what we are going to be discussing, you really need to make use and familiarize yourself, if you don't, with JavaScript. Okay, so you talk about variables, how to declare variables, and how the different types of variables that we have, your numbers, your booleans, your integers, your floats, your strings as well. Okay, you really need to know about that in JavaScript. We also really need to know um how your functions come about. Okay, we have functions as well. We have callbacks in JavaScript. So callbacks are okay. Let me not go too deep into that. We have functions. We can write functions in different ways in JavaScript. You really need to familiarize yourself with that. We have the control structures, your if else, your do while, your for loops, and so different ones as well. We have your data structures as well, your arrays, your maps, your what's it called? Okay, I don't know why I can't come up with them right as I'm explaining, but those different things are things that you really need to know about and how you can manipulate with them as well. And also, very, very, very importantly, you really need to know about asynchronous JavaScript. Okay, so asynchronous JavaScript is basically how you handle things that you really don't want to that you want to undo asynchronously. Okay, so your promises, your await, and your async, your promise, I've mentioned promise as well, how they all behave together in JavaScript. You really need to be very familiar with it, because those are the things we will throw around very, very often. Okay, so depending on where you are currently are in your proficiency and in JavaScript, you may need to go brush yourself up with it. So that's why I started this class by informing that I have made some assumption that we are all familiar with JavaScript programming language. But depending on your responses, we may spend maybe some other time that we may have before we actually get on with the development process to review what JavaScript is all about. So let me get it from everyone. How, maybe say on a scale of 1 to 10, how familiar are we with some of these things discovered pertaining to JavaScript? So say let's start with Olayinka. What was your response on a scale of 1 to 10? One for totally ignorant and 10 for expert level.
I think my response would be five. I know my way around. I will make sense.
All right, so you know your way around. Okay, how about you, Mahmood?
Sorry, I'm not sure if I got the question right. Is it like, do we know our way around writing JavaScript? Was that the question?
That's basically that.
Oh, okay. Not really, but I know of variables and loops in other languages. So if it's still concepts, I think I can just familiar around. But the syntax of JavaScript, I'm not really familiar with it.
Okay. Who else? Let's see. How about you, Emmanuel?
I think I'm a six. The long I did Java, but I think I'm a six. Six out of 10.
Okay. How about you, Ayobami? I think you came later in the call. Okay.
Yeah,
How about you?
I would
All right.
say eight.
An eight. Okay. All right. That's good. Okay. So basically, it looks like most people are at least either they can find their way around or they've worked with these concepts in other languages, but they may need to revise or review what JavaScript comes to is really offering or thereabouts. But yeah, that at least that's we don't have someone that is a complete newbie to this. So that's what in general what I have to offer for today. But before I skip into the what's it called, the question and answer section, I really just want you to kind of take an overview into the curriculum we have. Okay, so we'll be talking about Node.js and Express.js. There are some things to really understand about them. We talk about the HTTP methods that I was trying to refer to, and your response code as well. You know, I said we have different kinds of responses, and how we can have a simple server starting up, and how we can structure a project. Okay, so depending on on how I can on what I have, I can show you, I think I can show you an already made project, okay, that you can basically see how we can structure the code. So, and also to also kind of show you the difference between a code that yeah is basically like maybe like a toy project and something that is okay and fit for production. So at this point, when I said that existing repositories, so there are basically some implementation of things that the reason why GitHub and the making of existing repositories is important in my own view is that you are basically trying to what's it called, to grab the brains of someone who is more advanced than you are. So once you see how their codes are implemented and you can read into how they implemented their code, you can kind of like get a glimpse into what they were thinking about when they implemented such code. So as a beginner, there are some things you won't really get from an early tutorial. Okay. So ability to see some projects being implemented publicly and then ability to learn from them is something that will get you going really, really quickly. Okay. So routing, how to do your endpoints, your databases, and how to do API testing with Postman. Very, very important. So I think a lot of those things will come up next week in week two. Working with Node.js and Express.js, doing some CRUD operations and stuff like that. We'll tell you what it is as well. Okay, how to handle your error very well and do logging your events basically. Okay, and we are going to be building projects as well. We're going to be building some simple projects before we can talk about some advanced backend tools. Okay, some I'll really prefer to call them intermediate tools. Okay, because there are things that a backend developer should be familiar with and to think about when the scenario calls for it. So another thing is we are going to have a capstone project. So I think I may likely want to introduce it in week six and we'll have a way of going around it as well. So I'm still trying to decide exactly which one we should implement. Maybe something that is really, really nice and will take us a lot of time. But say, for example, I really want it to be something that is very interesting and challenging. So that's what we want to bring all the ideas together in. Okay, so before we get ahead of ourselves and take too much of our time, perhaps it's okay to take some questions from everyone. I think Joshua asked you guys to put down your questions on the chat so that I can get to it. But I don't think I saw any questions, so it's fine to just ask them orally. Okay. So before I start mentioning people's names one by one, I think we can just volunteer and ask any question basically, or just give a general feedback. Okay. Let's hear from you, Ayobami. What do you think? What's your general understanding level of what we just did, and yeah, stuff like that.
Well, I would say session was enlightening, and I was able to like grab some concepts generally, how to go about like building and things to consider when building like a backend project. Next, I said next with Node.js. So I'll be looking forward to next week's class to see the concepts to be introduced to before I can really have an idea of what is going on in Node.js actually.
All right. How about you, Mahmoud? Let me hear from you, Mahmoud.
Oh, all right. Uh, so far I've understood all what you've explained basically well. Well, I mean, just like challenge or problem is like from like learning syntax to implementing a project. I think that's where the major issue is to be. Because like once you learn syntax of the language and like that's how to do, like how do you now build the project? Do you just start writing different things and expect something to happen, or is there a step-by-step syntax I'm supposed to write? So but I believe that as we go on, we'll figure that out together. But thank you.
Yeah, all right. Thank you for that. Yinka and Emmanuel. Okay. How about from you? Let's hear from you, Yinka, first.
All right. Thank you so much for the class. To be honest, it was really enlightening, like hearing from the basic to the point where we got to, right. It really gets me excited, like for what's in
All
store.
right.
So just really looking forward to how far we can go, and hopefully I get push out my first project as well. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. And you, Emmanuel. Emmanuel, are you there?
Hello, I can hear
Oh,
you. Yeah, good evening. I can hear you. I'm with
good
you.
evening. Yeah, I was
About the
saying,
question,
what was your
I'm not.
hello?
Go ahead, I can hear you.
Yeah, I was
Go
asking
ahead, I
about
can hear
your
you.
general feedback. Your general feedback, or if you have any question to ask.
I don't have a question. The longer I learn JavaScript, but I'm going to try and like pick up and learn a lot from. The session today was very informative. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. All right. You're welcome. All right. Thank you all for your kind words, and thank you for the time and paying attention as well. So as we go on, I think I have not really come and decided on a particular time, but I think I believe that our late evenings will likely be fine. I think something around maybe next week we may split it between two classes or more if necessary, because I want us to get our hands a lot dirty next week. So maybe next week I may call for more classes than we will have on a usual basis. Okay, but I'll give you the information. I'll tell you. I'll inform you early enough. Okay, so but usually I think something between 6, 7:30 or 5 thereabout should be okay by me. Okay, I'll always give you the. I'll say I'll basically inform you of the time today later on today, and I'll also send a message to the group chat on how you can reach me whenever you have any question. Just basically hit up the group chat. I would like some activity going on there as well. Okay, so with that being said, I think that's all for now. Nice to meet everyone, every one of you, and I hope we get to achieve to some certain extent over the course of this program. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Yeah, you too. Thanks. Bye.